All right, looks like we'll get going here. I want to welcome everyone to the City of Everett Planning Commission. Today is Tuesday, February 19th. Can we have roll call, please?
Chair Beck,
Here.
Commissioner Lavra,
Here.
Commissioner Tisdall,
Here.
Commissioner Yanasak,
Here.
Commissioner McGinn,
Here.
Commissioner Lark,
Here.
Commissioner Finch.
Here.
All right. Moving on to the minutes. Did anybody have any concerns or edits or discussion points? Does anybody want to move to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Commissioner Finch,
Yes.
Commissioner Lark,
Abstain.
Commissioner McGinn,
Yes.
Commissioner Yanasak,
Yes.
Commissioner Tisdall,
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra,
Yes.
Chair Beck.
Yes. All right. Do any of the commissioners have reports or things they want to share? Commissioner Finch,
No, thank you.
Commissioner Lark,
I'm fine, thank you.
Commissioner McGinn,
Not tonight.
Yanasak.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll move along to staff comments.
Good evening, Alan Giffen, Planning Director. Just wanted to remind you and the public who may be watching or paying attention that we will have a special meeting next week, the 26th, to discuss the riverfront, the landfill property within the riverfront redevelopment district. It'll be a public workshop, no decision being made, and it'll be at the usual time of 6:30 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this time, I think we have one person signed up here. The public wishes to make any comments. I think Ryan Weber. Could you please come? State your name and address for the record.
Ryan Weber, my address is... Hello? Okay, my name is Ryan Weber. I'm at 1522 Chestnut Street. I'm here today regarding the land use designations, the effort to possibly consolidate those. I have some concerns with this. It appears to be a unilateral citywide height adjustment up to 10 stories for multifamily zoned properties and up to 8 stories for commercial properties. This is a concern to me since my house is zoned R3L, which allows up to currently, I believe, 35 feet with 8 units. But this would allow 10 stories if a developer purchased my lot along with neighboring lots. Large portions of the Delta neighborhood where I live are zoned multi-residential or commercial, and there has already been much local opposition to a new suburban-style gated development called Riverview at 16th and East Marine View Drive. That's only at, it's going to be, when completed, about 64 feet or 4 stories by comparison. Proposed zoning changes would have allowed up to 10 stories. Either 10 or 8 stories is completely out of character with the historic homes in this neighborhood. Delta is not prepared for such high density, with many streets still lacking basic pedestrian safety elements like sidewalks and crosswalks. On 15th Street, bus riders must stand on the street to wait for the bus. High-density zoning is too heavily weighted on the east side of Broadway, while west of Broadway, with more infrastructure in place, it's largely zoned single family. I believe development should focus more heavily on Metro Everett, which we just raised the height limits there. Everett Station vicinity and the Broadway corridor. These areas have many places with untapped potential. As we can see, there are a lot of properties that are not even close to 25 stories. So these should be more fully utilized before expanding the height limits citywide is just not necessary, and it's out of the character of these neighborhoods with historic properties. I guess I do wonder where this is coming from, if there were any possible developments being proposed. Is that the reason for requesting this citywide? I know it affects Delta greatly because we have a lot of this zoning currently in place, which is limiting them to about 4 stories. So thank you for allowing my comments.
Thank you. Point of order, Kathy, and I apologize, but general comments is circled, and I think this is an item for item 3. It needs to be, yes, my apologies. It's a little confusing on the list here, so. So at this point, we'll move on to item number 1, the Shoreline Master Program Periodic Update.
So I have a quick introductory presentation. There's a few slides, and I'm not quite sure if that's on the screen for the public or it's televised. The commissioners should have a hard copy of it in a packet that was mailed probably several weeks ago, so you can follow along with that. So the Shoreline Master Program, for the last year, we've been working on amendments to it as part of our mandatory periodic review. And by way of introduction for people who are new to the process, I'll just describe a few items. So first of all, what is the Shoreline Master Program? It's a policy document. So reads a little bit like a comprehensive plan. It also has shoreline environment designations, which are applied to geographic regions within the shoreline jurisdiction. And then there's a series of maps that are within the document. And then there's also development regulations for governing activities and uses within the shoreline area. So the shoreline jurisdiction is fairly broad, really. There's the marine waters of Port Gardner Bay. There are the major river, Snohomish River, that's within the city limits. Unincorporated Snohomish County has their own shoreline master program that governs areas outside of the cities. And then portions of the Salton River are also governed by the city's shoreline master program that are in city limits. There's Lake Chaplin, way up in our watershed, as well as Silver Lake that are within Everett's shoreline jurisdiction. And then shoreland properties, so the beach area or from an ordinary high water mark landward 200 feet is under shoreline jurisdiction. Then there are about half a dozen associated wetlands. Our creek areas along Port Gardner Bay, like Pigeon Creek, for example, are within shoreline jurisdiction to some extent because of the wetland areas that are hydrologically connected with the sound. And then places like Smith Island and Marshland that were annexed more recently since the Shoreline Master Program was established. The entire 100-year floodplain is included in shoreline jurisdiction. The City of Everett's initial Shoreline Master Program was adopted and approved by the state back in 1976. And there was a comprehensive update conducted in 2002. There was an appeal, and that was settled 3 years later in 2005. So that was the last comprehensive update of the program. Over the years, there have been 7 limited scope amendments, some of which have addressed some of the items that the state would require with our periodic review. So the periodic review is really focused on 3 different topics. first of all. It's to make sure that our local regulations and the program itself is consistent with state changes in the rules. And there have been some changes over the years. The second focus of the periodic review is to ensure local consistency. So since our 2005 comprehensive update, we've updated our comprehensive plan in 2015. We also updated our critical area regulations in 2015. And then later on tonight's agenda, you'll hear this year, we're updating our critical area regulations also. So trying to make sure that all of our regulations are in alignment is another focus of this periodic review. And then the third item is to sort of reassess if there's some changed circumstances with local uses, what kind of development has occurred in our shoreline jurisdiction that perhaps needs to be reflected in update to the program. The process is established through a grant contract with the State Department of Ecology, and David Pater is here tonight from Ecology to speak to you in a few moments. We prepared a public participation plan at the beginning of the process, and about a year ago, shared that here with the commission. And then in working through that plan, we formed a shoreline advisory committee, and that group met and was very diligent in doing good work with staff. Last year, they met 5 times, and then they also held a community open house last June. They reached consensus on proposed draft amendments that are the subject of tonight's public hearing. So the document is on the website, and the planning commissioners have hard copies of it. At our last briefing in January, staff talked about having prepared a cleaned up version of the document because there's quite a few in the legislative underlined strikeout with a red font. So, some of the pages are a little difficult to read, so we went ahead and accepted all the changes that were proposed so it would be easier to review the document. And one of the things that was pointed out, I believe Commissioner Lavra asked a question about the maps. And because that wasn't legislative format, that we didn't quite catch that. So there's 6 of the shoreline environment designation maps that we had proposed changes to. And so we had a grid number, and then we had that same number with a little a. And so those were duplicative. And so we've gone ahead and had just the one proposed series of the maps. So the commissioners should have been provided a cleaned up version with the hole punching, so you can substitute from grid 5 through grid 10. You can put that within your document. So then the document dated January 16th, 2019 is the proposed version of the master program that's under your review right now. And the focus of the review, again, was to update our jurisdiction and our maps, align it with current adopted plans, and to make sure we had regulatory consistency and we're using the best available science, protecting critical areas citywide, but also within shoreline jurisdiction. So then the last slide is a flow chart of the process, and I'm sorry it's not up on the screen, and I know it's a little small to look in your packet, but I'd like to let David Pater talk a little bit about what this...
copies of it.
Okay, that'd be great. And then-
So I'm David Pater, a shoreline planner with the Department of Ecology in Bellingham, and I've been working with the city since the beginning of the process, attended and participated in many of the advisory committee meetings. I've reviewed multiple drafts of the SMP, provided comments to Karen, and I think we're in great shape. We've worked out most of the comments. So invariably, there could be more changes depending on the public comment that is received and whether that justifies or a need for additional changes, and we'll see over time. So the one-page chart I handed out is the flow chart. Sort of describes the process on where we're at in terms of the public hearing, the joint public hearing tonight, and then the remaining of the local and state process. So about three boxes down, you'll see, well, actually 4 boxes down, the joint local state comment period and hearing. That's where we are right now. So once we finish that, the city and Karen will prepare a response to the public comments. And by statute, the city has 30 days to prepare that response and then send it to Ecology. Sounds like she's going to provide it to you folks in a couple of weeks. So once that's done, the city would put together a preliminary submittal of the SMP, which would consist mainly of the revised documentation of the local process, documentation of the state in compliance with the State Environmental Policy Act, things like that. And that would be submitted to Ecology. And the first thing we do is just kind of do a checklist, make sure everything is there that needs to be there, send out a notification of completeness. And once that's done, then we make an initial determination on consistency with the state shoreline laws, the State Shoreline Management Act, and the Shoreline Master Program guidelines. And then we send what we call an initial determination, and apparently it's in a memo form. This is something new that Ecology is doing with this joint review, back to the city, indicating, let's say, that the SMP is consistent with state shoreline laws. So the city can feel confident in moving forward to the next phase. Let's say the Planning Commission adopts the SMP next month, and then they can move to the City Council for their process and hopefully subsequent local adoption. Once that's done, then the city would submit the final SMP to Ecology, SMP package, and we would go through a similar process. We would determine completeness, we would determine consistency with the state shoreline laws. And then we would move into the final Ecology review, which involves a number of layers of management review within my program, Shoreline Environmental Assistance, and eventually leads to the review by the director of the department, who ultimately signs off on any Shoreline Master Program approval. So in a nutshell, that's how the process will probably play out. So if you have any questions about the process or anything, I'm here to hopefully answer them.
Any questions? Commissioner Lark?
So after tonight, we have a period for comment, correct?
Right.
And how long does that period last?
Well, this is the third time around because of all the snow and everything. I think Karen said.
In theory, how long?
Well, it ends on the 22nd.
22nd
of February.
of February.
Yeah, it's been extended multiple times
Okay.
because of the cancellation of the 2 other hearings. So once that's over, then Karen will consolidate the comments and put together a response. And like I said, it sounds like you're going to share it with the Planning Commission on the 5th of March.
Correct.
And that would be part of the submittal to Ecology, would be the summary of those comment responses too.
So we will not be taking a vote tonight on a resolution. We're just, even though we're having the hearing, we're going to come at this again with a resolution.
Actually, there'll be 2 more steps. So the March 5th, your next regularly scheduled meeting. At that time, I'll bring whatever comments we've received, because the comment period has been extended beyond the 30 days, but it closes at the end of this week. So by March 5th, we'll have all the comments and share that with the commission. We also have implementation steps related to how the SMP is reflected in our comprehensive plan, as well as how it's addressed in our land use code. So we've prepared materials about that, and
And
we'll
that'll be
share,
that second meeting that you were
we'll
talking
share
about.
that with you on the 5th, actually, March 5th. Then, March 19th is then when you will see the resolutions for you to potentially take action
Okay.
on the document.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this topic,
I have questions.
Commissioner?
So, questions for Karen. There were a couple of things that were confusing or not clear. I have, on page 26,
And so when you're referring to the document, are you looking at the January 2nd draft, which is
Yes,
the underlying
yes,
crust?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
I'm sorry, what page again?
26, under substantial development permit. The last sentence there, I think I know what it means, but I don't really think it says that. It was an addition, it was in red. I'm looking at the clean version.
That's why I'm not finding it. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. It was red in the original.
Okay, so you're looking at page 26.
Item number 2.
Two, substantial
last
development.
sentence.
Okay, which says for construction of docks, that particular one? Okay. So this is from the state WAC, where they, every 5 years, establish what the dollar amount is, that if it's less than that, then it's not subject to the permit. So this is from the WAC. That doesn't mean that it necessarily is clear. So do you have a proposal to change the wording or a
Yeah,
question?
actually, yeah, I do.
Okay,
Actually, I think if you just remove the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words and put a period after the word footage, I think it would just be a lot clearer sentence.
okay. So you're proposing then the existing dock being replaced, just deleting those
Yes,
words?
yeah,
Okay.
because it kind of says the same thing twice in a confusing way.
Okay,
And then I have another doc question, which I just don't understand, so, and in the same version of the document, on page 138,
okay, is this the page talking about the weirs?
no, this is the clean document, page 138. It's talking about docks and floats.
Okay,
On page 138, item number 4, it says that they can only be 4 feet wide. But then on the next page, under item number 7 for single-family piers, it says that they can be 6 feet in width. So I don't understand how those can both be right.
so I believe this is something that the state commented on, and so for single-family docks, and actually it's for the piers, number 7, regulation, it says piers shall be oriented perpendicular to the shoreline. No pier or dock shall exceed 4 feet in width, 25 feet in length, or 5 feet in height above the ordinary high water mark on the landward side. So that's for a single-family pier or dock.
Oh, it doesn't say pier or dock in this version, but,
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's, that's the recommendation from the state, that we need to change it and narrow the, by a foot. So they've asked for it to be no wider than 4 feet.
Okay, well, yeah, it just looked like these two items were conflicting each other, so that, I just wanted
I
to,
think that you're recognizing that there's a change, and so there's a narrowing by a foot is what the state is now recommending.
oh. Well, I just, it looks like 2 feet to me, 6 minus 4,
Okay.
and they're both in the clean version, so it doesn't seem like one's a change of the other. That's the part.
So, I'm looking under the heading, single-family piers, docks, and floats, number 7, and you're contrasting that with,
Right, the next, on the page before it, item number 4.
that starts with new piers, docks, and
Right,
floats. On marine waters.
Yeah,
Shall have a maximum width of 4 feet and a maximum walkway width of 4 feet.
yeah.
So now they're both saying 4 feet, if I'm
Well, I guess the one, the other one will say 4 feet, right now it's
Yes.
a 6.
yes.
Okay.
The state has asked us to reduce that to 4.
Okay, then that's fine. I
Okay.
just didn't understand why
Okay.
that was that way.
Okay, thank you for your careful reading.
I'm trying. It was hard. My only other question is, it doesn't appear that there were a lot of revisions to chapters 6 and 7. So I was just wondering if some of those projects have been built and if there were updates to them.
So chapter 6 is shoreline modifications.
Well,
Is that,
yeah, I guess, I mean 7, basically, where it's the restoration plans.
oh, the shoreline restoration plan. That's correct, except for the description for the marshland area.
Yeah,
We
Marshland
had
did
talked
have
about
a lot of
that in the
edits.
past. So the state did not provide local governments money to update the restoration plans, which is a required element.
Yeah.
So we didn't update it.
I see, it just wasn't, yeah, it appeared that way. Okay. I think that's my last question.
Okay.
Quick question. If it's required, how are you balancing that? I mean, obviously, you're not updating it, but is the state at some point going to provide
So-
funding for this?
So the restoration plan for the city of Everett is pretty up to date. It was adopted in 2011, I believe. That was something that was an outcome of the settlement agreement back in 2005 with the comprehensive update. So it is, as plans go, it is relatively updated. And because it's restoration, there were many years' worth of potential projects or activities that could occur to restore habitat. So it was not envisioned that they would all be done within a couple of years or something, so,
That makes sense.
yeah.
Makes sense. Any other questions?
Are we gonna be hearing public comment tonight?
Yes, but wanted to find out if,
I'll wait.
all right. So at this point, we'll open it up to public comment. Is there anyone in the audience? I didn't receive any, oh, I did, excuse me. Laura Gurley.
Good evening, Commissioners. Laura Gurley with the Port of Everett. Nice to see everyone here tonight. I just wanted to acknowledge and thank Karen and her hard work and the board, the advisory committee too. There's a couple of folks here in attendance tonight, and we were part of that as well at the port. We did submit a formal comment letter. Wanted to see if anyone had questions on that. We had 2 items that we wanted just to get a little clarification from the city, to make sure that, nothing drastic was changing regarding maintenance activities. The same section that Commissioner Lavra had on the maintenance with the dollar values and square footage and whatnot, we submitted a comment on that just to make sure that it's clear the differences when it comes to exemptions, single-family homes versus like a commercial marina. There are distinctions there. And then the other item is the 2% for public access program that we actually had adopted as a port resolution back in 2000, that we're kind of happy to see that the city was going to implement that as an in lieu fee option for shoreline public access on certain projects if other folks, in addition to the port, weren't going to be able to actually have public access on the property that they were developing or owned. So we added some tips, lessons that we've learned over the years in working with the city on implementing our own 2% for public access program and helping to better quantify for certainty, which developers like, how to determine what that dollar value would be. So just wanted to see if anybody had any questions on the comments that we had submitted. All right.
I guess I do have a question. Do you know if, when the advisory group put this together, had you raised these particular issues with them previously? Has this been something that they discussed and came up with this language anyway, or is this the first time you've noticed this particular issue and are raising that?
So we met over the course of a year. I mean, it was kind of stretched out, and there were, how many different red line versions, Karen? 3, at least? So the 2% one came up later in the redlining process, so there were no more meetings scheduled after that one came out. So we just took the opportunity to formally submit a comment. And then we don't so much have a problem with either one that we commented on. We just wanted some clarifications. The maintenance item, I think, we're all busy people. I know you guys are. And going through all the red line versions with a fine-toothed comb took some time. It was definitely the deepest dive I've ever done into this. But it was a good learning curve for us too, just to make sure, is there anything confusing when we're all not here anymore, people are retired, and the language is still on the books. We wanted to make sure that things were clear. So some of it may have been in there. The 2% definitely wasn't in the earlier versions, so that's why we felt we wanted to comment on it. Anybody else? Great.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this topic? Going once? Going twice? Moving right along. Let's, agenda item number 2, critical areas.
We'd recommend that you close the public hearing. So a motion and second and a vote would be appreciated.
Thank you.
I guess I do have a quick, maybe a procedural question from Karen. So this comment from the port, if we receive other comments before the close of comment period, I understood then the city's going to be making a written response to that, and that's what will be presented to us on the 5th as well?
Yes.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, the newbie here. Does anybody want to move to close the public hearing?
I move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
All right.
Commissioner Finch,
Yes.
Commissioner Lark,
Yes.
Commissioner McGinn,
Yes.
Commissioner Yanasak,
Yes.
Commissioner Tisdall,
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra,
Yes.
Chair Beck.
Yes. Thank you. Good catch. You ready to go?
Yep, ready for me, okay, sorry.
Yep.
David Tyler, planning staff. David Tyler, planning staff. I'm here to talk about critical areas ordinance revisions. I apologize, we're having some technical problems with the display, so I'm going to hand you some written copies of our presentation or some printed copies. So just to summarize the background, where we're at, the purpose of the updates to the critical areas standards. Basically, we're trying to consolidate the shoreline critical area regulations and the regulations for the rest of the city. So this ordinance essentially pulls in the shoreline areas and adopts the same standards for both shoreline and non-shoreline areas. The ordinance, in our opinion, also helps to streamline and consolidate the regulations, make them a little bit simpler, a little bit easier to use within the boundaries of the fact that many of these standards are required, and we can't really cut or eliminate those standards. Many of them are required under growth management and by ecology guidelines. And we also are updating regulations to reflect current best available science that's been mainly adopted by the Department of Ecology regarding wetland buffers. So we've made a few revisions to some of our buffer standards and some of the thresholds for smaller wetlands and when they can be altered. Briefly, to review some of the changes from the last meeting. Number one, and I think this is on page 6 of the red line version, there is, as I mentioned previously, some slightly different language with regard to exceptions dealing with smaller wetlands. For example, you will see on page 6 of the red line version that's highlighted, that language will replace existing language dealing with wetland exceptions. And generally what the exceptions do is they mean that you don't have to follow the standard protocol for mitigation sequencing, that you don't have to necessarily, as a matter of priority, prioritize preserving the wetland. You can go straight to mitigation or filling with mitigation. And then the second change has to do with another exception, and that is for accessory structures within a legally disturbed critical area buffer. And in the previous version, we had some language that generally allowed for structures up to 200 square feet to be located within non-conforming altered buffer areas. That exception language is still there, but we've refined it. And I would direct you to the handout to sort of illustrate what that means. And so I have an example here on the, I think it's the 3rd page, which shows an aerial image. This is a residential lot. It is a county-approved subdivision that was built out probably in the early 80s, so prior to any critical area regulations being adopted. The house was built, and then the yard was established, and then on the far left-hand side of the picture is Swamp Creek. Swamp Creek is a type F stream with a 150-foot buffer. 150-foot buffer in this picture would extend out probably into the middle of the street, off to the right of the right-hand side of the picture. So you have essentially nothing but yard between the house and the stream. And this property owner does not have any options really under the current code for doing anything with that backyard. And unfortunately, the slide that shows the current code requirements is missing here. But essentially, you can see the deck on the back of the house. They could expand the deck in line with the current deck, but get no closer to the stream. So that leaves about an 8-foot strip next to the house where they could expand the deck. The house could conceivably be expanded by 5 feet or so on the north. That would be in the top of the picture, or maybe a little bit towards the front property line. But really, that property owner's options are limited under current code. So if you go to the next sheet, this would be an illustration of what we're proposing. And I apologize again, this is black and white, not color. The color version is a lot easier to understand. So if you look at the left side of the picture, you'll see a dashed line that runs vertically. And what we've tried to do is show the inner half of the buffer and the outer half. The inner half being the portion closest to the stream, the outer half being closest to the house. So the outer half would be the portion of the buffer under the proposed language where someone could locate a smaller structure, whether it's, you know, a detached garden shed or a 100 square foot deck expansion. That would be allowed in that outer portion of the buffer as an exemption. So in that language is on page 5 of the red line version, number 2 at the bottom of the page. Actually, excuse me, this would be K, closer to the top of the page, highlighted. New structures such as storage buildings, garden sheds, and additions up to 100 square feet would be exempt. So they wouldn't need to go through and do anything special. They could just install it. And then the second option, and this is shown on the next page, this would be option 2, would be to do a structure up to 200 square feet, also within the outer half of the buffer, and that could include a deck addition, garden tool shed, or an addition to the house. And in this case, because it's more than 100, less than 200, the property owner would be required to do a critical area study, along with some enhancement of the existing non-conforming buffer, and install critical area fence and signs. So this would be more or less a full environmental review for up to 200 square foot addition, as opposed to the exemption for up to 100 square feet. So that's kind of the distinction between the two sizes of expansions. So I just wanted to illustrate that standard as we've proposed it. We initially ran it past Ecology. They were generally supportive. This is a little bit of refinement to that language, and so we wanted to also run it by you and make sure you were clear on what the intent of the standard was. So those are really the primary changes from the last version of the Chapter 37 code rewrites. And I think we've tentatively scheduled the decision meeting for March 19th. So that would be final action. Plus, there are some additional companion amendments that would go along with the changes to the critical area standards, and that includes some procedural changes to local project permit procedures, Title 15, as well as some consistency changes to the zoning code. So we'll bring those before you, but they're really nothing of substance there. They're primarily procedural. So we have a look at those at the next meeting.
The March 5th meeting, is that, or, because the next meeting is the special hearing for the riverfront, and then I guess March 5th is, so we'll be hearing those March 5th?
I thought it was going to be the 19th.
For a hearing on the 19th, but if you're prepared, you could just hand them out on the 5th.
Sure. Yeah, I
Okay.
can bring them to you on the 5th. Yeah, because they should be ready by then. Okay.
Sounds good. Commissioner Finch?
Question, on the proposed code revision, could these expansions be done multiple times, or is this a
No,
one-time event?
this would be a one-time, an aggregate total square footage of 100 or 200.
Thank you.
And if we need to clarify that language to, you know, to make it absolutely certain, we could probably add something, because I was kind of thinking that afterwards as well, that maybe we needed to clarify that.
I would agree that that clarification may be necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? I have a quick question. I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, but I'm just looking at this one example, and wouldn't flooding come into this at some point? I mean, this house looks like, are there other issues that would surround this property in terms of what they can build? I mean, a shed and a deck are one thing, but actually building an improvement is quite different. I mean, that's an investment, and I would think
Right.
flood insurance and things like that might make that more
And
challenging.
what I can say is that for this particular development, there is a drainage easement that runs on either side of Swamp Creek, approximately 20 feet on either side of the creek. And so certainly we'd want to look at elevations. We don't necessarily have this area mapped as a flood zone. It would probably be outside the, the zone, I think it would be Zone X on the floodplain map. I haven't confirmed that.
Particularly if it has a drainage easement on
It
it.
has an established plat required drainage easement, so we would certainly honor that and review that in terms of looking at any proposed improvements on the site, and we would not allow any improvements within the drainage easement.
All right, so at this time, we'll open this up to a public hearing. Is there anybody, I don't think I have anyone, I'm pretty confident of this one, who would like to speak to this topic at this time? All right. Do I hear a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Finch,
Yes.
Commissioner Lark,
Yes.
Commissioner McGinn,
Yes.
Commissioner Yanasak,
Yes.
Commissioner Tisdale,
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra,
Yes.
Chair Beck.
Yes. Okay. Moving along to agenda item 3, land use element. That's you, David, right?
It is me.
Take her away.
Need to warm up my vocal cords here, so we'll have to get Alan involved because he has to warm them up for next week. Alan, it's gonna be Alan's show.
You probably need some rest.
This element, this was gonna be just kind of a focus portion of the land use and urban design element amendments. I do want to kind of jump back to Ryan's comments at the beginning, and I suggested he testify during the open comment period because we're actually not focusing on that portion tonight of the land use consolidation. But I want to answer some of those issues. When we were looking at the land use consolidation, we've walked through that before, and we're scheduled for hearing on March 5th. Is that it's the comprehensive plan, so it's not zoning regulation. So same kind of concerns some of the commissioners here have had and other folks as we present this is that there's questions about zoning, and we're not changing any zoning, we're changing the comprehensive plan. And in this case, for example, the height issue is that there's no heights being changed whatsoever. But in the plan document itself, there's requirement under the Growth Management Act that talks about the land use designations, and you have to have some kind of indication of what the potential building intensities could be in that area. And so for multifamily, for example, we said multifamily is an area that could go up to 10 stories. And so when we come back at the meeting in 2 weeks, we might want to take a look at that development standards table because it has about some densities, building height, and lot coverage, and it's a very simple table, but it doesn't, again, affect any zoning, so no zoning is going to change as a result of that. But that's an indication that when we think about multifamily, in general, we're thinking about tall buildings in the city, and so as a policy, we are thinking about that, but that doesn't mean that the end result when we get to code streamlining is that all multifamily zones will be at 10 stories. Those are conversations that are going to go over the next 2 years of what the actual height should be. So with that as a precursor, we're not going to talk about any of that tonight. We're actually going to talk about two other parts that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet. Is one is some additions to and updates to this specific geographic area land use policies, and then adding East Marine View Drive as a gateway corridor. And have copied the sections out of the plan that talk about the geographic areas, and part of this comes from the mayor's directive to look at some areas, and so we've added some language in here. Some of it already exists, but in particular kind of call out particularly the Everett Mall is one that really didn't stand out as a specific geographic area. We have a lot of language in the plan already about Payne Field. We had things about North Broadway in there. Evergreen Way has had its own planning process. We've had that, and of course, we just wrapped up Metro Everett. So we've had a lot of that conversation, the plan in the past, but what we didn't definitely have is anything about Everett Mall. As we see the changing landscape of retail and the location of that mall, that's a potential area that we want to kind of monitor and make sure that we're nimble to respond to some changes potentially necessary on that to make that a vibrant part of our community. And so we've added that as a priority area. And then really what we've done is, in large measure, is just gone through and done some updates. Some of them are tied back to updates about Payne Field, because some of this is talking about the airport terminal coming in, and now we know that are they flying or any day now out of there? As soon as I clear the runways, but really soon, I think, out of Payne Field. Same thing about light rail, updated some of that because it talked about light rail coming to the city, and now we know that that's been approved. And so large measure, a lot of just updates in there, but the biggest thing I think is the addition really of Everett Mall as an identified priority area in that. Second amendment, and it actually bridges between both the land use element and the urban design element, is that there is a request from the Delta neighborhood to also add East Marine View Drive as a gateway corridor. And so we have added that as a proposal in both the land use and the urban design element. It doesn't have any regulatory effect anywhere in the code. I think that was a question the commission had when we did a real quick briefing of this before. With the exception that sometimes under the State Environmental Policy Act, we sometimes use some mitigation to do some additional landscape and other aesthetic enhancements along those corridors for projects that are subject to the State Environmental Policy Act. And so I know that there's been some times that we look at that as a policy basis to add a little bit more protection for the neighborhood in some of these gateway corridors. But with that, we are looking at having a public hearing in 2 weeks. Still have a little bit of things I'm trying to get from Public Works. There's some updates about water quality and some other things that trying to get some updates from them, and I'm hoping to have that from them at the end of this week. And so we'll get you a full new land use element for subject to the public hearing on March 5th.
All right, thank you.
David, so the gentleman that spoke at the start of our meeting, what was there a particular citation of what he was talking about in particular? Where is that?
It's not in the, all I did is I tried to keep your packet light tonight, and I just took out those two subjects, so it's not in this. It was in one of your previous land use element.
Do you happen to know which one that was?
We briefed at the beginning of, or in January, I think we did. So the third, or the second meeting in January, I think you should have a packet from that.
Okay, I'll go back and look, thanks.
I think so. Yeah, and there's a development standards table in there that has that in there, so, yeah. And we'll call it out, we'll talk about it a little bit more at the hearing on the 5th to make sure that you're aware of it. And we'll kind of look at that in light of the comments too, see if there's something else.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts? You guys are a quiet bunch tonight.
Are you
Saw
looking for
that.
questions on your proposed changes now?
If you have any, sure, yeah.
I have a few. On page 1 of the red line, policy 2.9.1, you've listed the specific plans. Is there a priority to that list? And if not, could they be prioritized in some way?
They definitely are not put in any kind of priority order by myself. I think that, I'm not even sure how I came up with putting that order together other than typing a list. They could, I think that, I don't know
If I could jump in here, these came out of a directive from Mayor Franklin about a year ago about some priorities of hers related to community development and economic development. And so we would probably take this back to the mayor to recommend any prioritization. We do have a new economic development director who's also got some thoughts that will probably look at the south part of the town, involve some of Evergreen Way, although not the entire length of that corridor. As David mentioned, we did a major overhaul of Evergreen Way in 2012 with a plan and a brand-new zone, rezone the entire corridor about 6 miles to the zoning that applies there now. But this is something, because of the new administration as of last year, it's no longer new, but the priorities that were identified at that time did not set a priority, and we would go back to Mayor Franklin if we were to ask for priorities. But we're certainly happy to take any thoughts that commission may have as to priorities for any of these areas and provide that feedback to the mayor.
I guess from my perspective, given that this is a policy document, not a zoning document, some prioritization of these plans does make some sense to me. And given the importance of Metro Everett in the context of general Everett economic development, I would suggest that that should be a top priority.
Thank you.
More questions? That's okay?
Sure. Sure.
On the next page, figure 4, it appears that part of the shaded area is outside of the city limits. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And I guess looking at the text related to the Southwest Everett Paynefield Manufacturing Industrial Center, do you think that a concentration of industrial manufacturing uses, given the new commercial service, is an appropriate long-term concentration of use, or are there other uses that we should also highlight in this text?
That's a great question, and we do have in our comprehensive plan some policies that call for the preservation and protection of industrial land for industrial uses and job growth in particular. And that's also actually an emerging policy topic at the regional level through the PSRC. And so this is something that, if there are regional policies that have been adopted in Vision 2040 or updated in the pending update, which we'll call Vision 2050, then those priorities have to get filtered out through local comprehensive planning processes. If there are other uses that would be considered in the industrial areas that are identified on that map, at least within the city limits, then we'd have to carefully weigh the impact of those changes to the ability for industrial uses to continue and to protect that land for industrial purposes. A lot of the area around the airport is designated industrial because of the impact of noise impacts from flight operations that would make residential use incompatible. And so obviously we wouldn't want to create mixed use zones within a flight path or within a noise impact area there. But things that may, I guess, be compatible with an airport, such as a hotel, those are already allowed in our industrial zones, although they are not, certainly not in industrial use.
Great, thank you. And then looking at the Everett Community College, Washington State University Special Study Area, how does the designation of a special study area differ from the institutional overlay? Or is there a process difference, or is it just a nomenclature difference?
The main difference is that the study area would be a comprehensive planning type of process, whereas the institutional overlay zone is a set of zoning regulations that is established through a rezone process and a master plan process under zoning code.
Okay, great. And then I think 2 more questions. Everett Mall, policy 2.9.10. this just jumped out at me because when I think of the Everett Mall area and the future of that area, I was just surprised to see that it being listed as a well-utilized, high-density, mixed-use center for the city. I understand it's a policy document, but at the same time, we're pursuing a number of those throughout the city, and I wonder just how much demand we can actually satisfy.
And I guess the purpose of putting this in a comprehensive plan in a land use element is to identify this area as probably an area that requires a lot of additional study.
Sure.
Before we would change any land use regulations or establish any different priorities. Frankly, it's an area that we have not ever done any detailed master planning for outside of a property-specific master plan for the Everett Mall property, but the surrounding area, we've never done anything akin to a Metro or Evergreen Way type of a planning process.
Okay, all right, great. And then final question, I like the inclusion of the East Marine View Drive as a gateway corridor. I'm not sure what policy 2.4.6 means. And so if you could describe that in a tangible example, that would be great. And then also question why south of 19th Street is the delineation as opposed to, say, 23rd, given that the character changes more dramatically when you get further south.
Okay, so first part of that question, what does the policy mean? What's the intent of this policy in designating those streets? And this has been in the comprehensive plan since, we probably first adopted it under the Growth Management Act in the mid-90s. And that was to identify streets that would be potential areas for zoning type of exercises. And we've done that on North Broadway, for example, and did a major rewrite of the zoning for all of North Broadway. We haven't gotten very far on that list of streets and doing special studies. In some cases, they might be more related to some urban design type of treatments rather than a major overhaul of a zoning code. But because all of these are well-traveled, prominent arterial streets, and they have quite being linear corridors that have a very close relationship to surrounding residential zones, that policy was put in so that we could, as either city council, planning commission, or mayor, or neighborhoods saw fit to request changes to look at things. So, and I'll go back to the North Broadway zoning that was changed about 10 years ago from what had been just B2 and C1 zoning to a more detailed set of design standards. That grew out of a neighborhood, actually a SEPA appeal that came out of one of four neighborhoods that flank Broadway. And ultimately, the city council had us hire an urban design and planning consultant to come up with a new set of development standards for the North Broadway area, and so, not all of these are going to follow the same pattern or be prioritized in any specific order. It's really more to identify that there are some issues that could be looked at in more detailed planning studies.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just have one quick question, kind of following up off the question regarding prioritization back at policy 2.9.1. I mean, as this is a policy piece, how binding would a prioritization of these areas be, and what would be the impact of prioritization? Would it have any impact on funds being allocated for the studies, or or studies, us principally, looking to another place and ignoring kind of the facts on the ground, or maybe economic activity or community organizing on the ground in those certain areas? Just kind of want to get a little more input on that.
Well, establishing a priority, I'm not sure how that would be used. For example, Commissioner Finch used the example of Metro Everett being a priority, and obviously it was. We spent 2.5 years working on a major policy document and rezoning of the entire area. And it'll continue to be a focus of the cities for encouraging economic development. But now that we have a plan and we have all this zoning in place for Metro, we probably would not need to do a major work item to change any of that. You know, it's really on the implementation side and probably more through other programs such as a community renewal area type of a plan to get at blight or an economic development focus. And so calling out a priority for any of these areas could mean very different things for each of these areas. It could be similar to what we did for Metro, or it could be some other type of focus like economic development or some kind of neighborhood-based planning process.
And going back to like, once, say if we did set a prioritization, I mean, how binding would that be? I mean, this policy documents aren't as dynamic of a document, so, you know, things could change and we may see the need to address or, you know, support a certain area of the city. And, you know, how would we be prohibited or kind of not given the resources to do that?
I think we could talk about priorities, but to me, it's kind of like your 6-year transportation improvement program. You list all of these projects, but you're not going to fund them in any order by priority. You do it more when the grant funding opportunity presents itself, that, you know, if it were freight mobility as opposed to pedestrian safety or a capacity type of a project. In the case of these priorities, I think we probably have to look to the mayor and city council to help us figure out what we're going to do next. They have to help us prioritize those and identify the funding if we were going to you know, do a major type of a planning effort. So putting any kind of priority in here to me is probably, I think, going to become very quickly dated as soon as, you know, one of those circumstances arises where city council and the mayor will say, well, no, we're going to focus on this area because of some other shift in priority. So I think to just remain responsive and nimble, we probably wouldn't end up prioritizing those in any order of doing this first, this second, this third.
Thank you, that's all I appreciate it, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, I think the market has a lot to do with priority too, and where people are actually interested in building, so.
That's the controller.
Yeah. So at this time, this is not a public hearing. This is just a briefing for us, but if anybody has any comments or questions or things they'd like to come to the podium. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to item number 4, the Metro Everett and Off-Street Parking Code. I think that's David, that's you again, isn't it?
It is. David Solheim, Long Range Planning Manager. And so I'm gonna, since we don't have a PowerPoint, I'm gonna, you have a memo, I'm gonna jump to page 4 of the memo because has a little bit more of the details that are there, and just kind of quickly walk through these. We have these also scheduled for public hearing at your next meeting in 2 weeks on the 5th. Basically what these are is things that we've identified, staff have identified after the package of Metro Everett Code issues were adopted. Sometimes it's working with property owners or developers, and things have come to our attention. Other times it's us answering questions. And a few of them we actually found that when we took the version from the Planning Commission that you passed and took it to City Council, some things were actually dropped out of the final ordinance, and some kind of weird blame it on Microsoft episode kind of thing. But so that we had a few of those that actually got it out of your package, but it didn't get into the final ordinance, so we're coming back and cleaning that up. So in the package of amendments, we have a couple that are up front that are really focused in on off-street parking, first off. Some of these are really housekeeping things. First one is when a transportation demand management plan is required. We had picked this up in some places, but our building official wants it to be at when the building permit is issued, not at the certificate of occupancy, because he doesn't want his inspectors to hold up that document for really a planning-related item in essence. And so other sections of the code, we caught that, but we didn't catch this one at the last minute. If you have any questions as we're walking through them, I guess please feel free to stop me, but otherwise I'll keep on going. The second one is about separation of surface parking lots from public right-of-way. This really is about the distance tying the landscaping. It's a consistency with the landscape chapter, and that's all it is trying to make sure that that people look at the landscape chapter when there may be a greater distance that's required, and so point them to that chapter. Item number 3 is parking lot locations in Metro Everett. This is on the flip side of this, is that we had parking lots set back in the urban light industrial zone 15 feet, but the landscape strip was 10 feet, and so we had 5 feet of nowhere land. So in essence, we're talking about making that consistent, so the parking lot setback would be the same as the landscaping strip there at 10 feet. Number 4, parking lot landscaping and screening. This one, item C there, again, is rather than having the detail in there, what we want to do is point people to the parking chapter for the details. And you can see that in section C, we take it out, but then we pick that up in chapter 35 with the landscaping screening that talks about how that same provision's there, so that people will look at the landscape chapter for those standards about that parking of trucks and fleet vehicles are calculated when you're looking at landscape requirements. Item number 5 has to do with off-street parking for multifamily developments in the Evergreen Way mixed-use overlay zone. This was one that actually, I think, made it through the Planning Commission, but didn't get into the final. And we have all the parking standards in Chapter 34 of the zoning code, but we missed striking this one about the Evergreen Way one. And so again, we're just saying off-street parking go to Chapter 34 for those standards. We have a couple of changes in the land division title of the code. First one has to do with parking improvements for garages. Again, we had some very specific language where garages have to be and all the details, and really what we're doing is we're talking about how to divide land and not the development permits. And so we're telling people just make sure that you consider the parking and the requirements of Chapter 19.34 when you're doing your land division, and point to that. And so it's taking all that other out of that. Lot access and new land divisions. This has to do with the lot requirements or the front driveway approaches in here. This was another section we had amended. In this section we failed to amend this section, and so this is trying to make that consistent, to have the setback for the lot requirements access off a cul-de-sac requirements. Item number 8 is a unique form of land division called unit lot subdivisions. This is applicable really for new townhouses, and we did not add the Metro Everett zones to that. And so I want to make sure that that's a form of land division for sale that's available in Metro Everett. So we're adding the 3 Metro Everett zones as part of that. Item number 9 is upper floor building modulation. This has to do with the upper floors, floors 7 or 3 through 7 in the urban mix. So basically kind of the downtown, the really mixed use zone. We had on the interior side of the upper floors, they had to have a setback, and so that basically means a building is going up and then it's gonna have to be set back on an interior, and that's pretty inconsistent with what you see in downtowns. I mean, buildings will go up next to each other, and so What we had done is clearly another Microsoft error where we copied and pasted from another cell and dropped it in there and did that. And so now we're fixing our copy and paste thing as part of that issue there. Item number 10 is driveway approaches, the length of them. Again, this is similar to the other one for driveways, not less than 10 feet nor more than 30 feet for residential driveways. And so this is, and actually right now we're in a different title. We're not in the zoning code. We're picking up some amendments that are in public works standards. In our zoning code, that is what our standard is, and we didn't make this consistency issue in Title 13 that Public Works does for their driveway approaches. Item number 11 is a section that's not used anymore, that was deleted, 100, and so there's other authorities that exist for Public Works, and so proposing to take that out. Item number 12 has to do with authority for driveway approaches, the hazard. We had very old code, had the city council making those determinations, and we thought it might be better to have the city engineer make those determinations. Hopefully the city council will agree to that. We'll find out. Yeah, they get the final say on that. And item number 13 is design standards in the E1 mixed use overlay. This was taken out the drive-through windows. Those are all in chapter 35 of the code in the design standards. And then the last one, when we change 19.15.080, it only has to do with pedestrian access, and we forgot to change the title of that section to take out vehicular access because that's no longer in there. So, so a large list of housekeeping things. I think as Alan has said that whenever we do as much as we did, we're bound to find them, and we'll probably find more kind of thing. But we had a few that were we have identified early, and they weren't critical, and so we decided to kind of wait to make sure that we got a little bit more time between us to make sure that we got as much of a list as possible, so that we bring them as a package to the Planning Commission and Council and work through this. So.
Nice. Does anybody have questions for David?
On the landscape, have you got the police input on that?
We have in the past. I mean, with a lot of the stuff. I mean, with some of the crime prevention stuff.
A lot of times, what they're asking us to do is take the landscaping we have out, because it inhibits them from
for some visibility.
Finding folks, and certain populations like to locate there, and so that's why.
Yeah, we have worked with them on the code amendments, but we're actually going to be doing a landscape chapter consolidation as well as part of the code streamlining. So that's a good reminder to kind of take a look at that, make sure we put that in front of them and get some input.
Anyone else? So did you guys like officially take a page number before you started all these amendments and cleaning up the code? So that when you're done, you can kind of, how much you were able to reduce? Because I mean, you're doing a great job. There's a lot of housekeeping and cleaning going on.
There's no numerical goal, it's just,
I know, but I'm just like, wait.
let's try and make it as simple to use as possible, both, and understand, so both in the comprehensive plan and in the code, so we,
We haven't gotten the recodified version, so maybe we'll do it by weight. We can take the weight
like Weight
now
Watchers
when we
for
get the
zoning
revised one. Yeah. So yeah.
If it's not long enough, just put it on Microsoft.
There you go.
It
Does
is-
anybody else have any questions regarding this topic? Does everybody kind of? Victor, would you like to please come on up?
So do it. Thank you. Victor Harris, 3017 Lombard, beautiful downtown Everett.
Victor?
Take your mic.
It's on now.
It's on.
Sorry?
Take off.
Take that one off too, it would be much better. Page 8, 10 driveway approaches and length. I'm not sure that a minimum 10 feet is appropriate. There's a few houses up here that, if I think about it real close, the driveways are 10 feet, right to the garage door. And I will not speculate on how long some of the longest king cab pickups are, but once you add a trailer hitch to those, they stick out over the sidewalk. Very much a hazard for anybody walking, anybody with visual impairment, myself. I know others have talked to me about it as well. Code enforcement seems to have more important things to do, which I fully understand. Law enforcement has more important things to do, which I certainly understand. But we need to ensure that the driveway length is substantial so that anybody with these large vehicles have ample place to park and hang their trailer hitches up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
Just for clarification, that's the approach apron, that's the width, not the length of the driveway in that standard.
Thank you.
I'd make fooled.
All right, with that, do we have any housekeeping things that we need to?
Alan Giffen, Planning Director. I just wanted to mention that the packet that you've received for next week's public workshop is not all the materials that you'll be receiving. We're trying to kind of meter it out so that you're not overwhelmed with the first batch of documents. So these are more the concept documents. There'll be more detailed information that you'll receive following the workshop next week. Sometime after that, we'll get you much more detailed documents. It's already available on the website. If you'd like to take a look at our website, there are more detailed documents if you want more than what you've been handed tonight.
So, and I just want to clarify on that because I have been looking at the ones that are online. So all of them are online. So all the information that we'll be receiving as Planning Commission, unless there's some additionals that are added, but to date, we're.
Yeah, in fact, we're adding another document to that, to the online information. Today, we've received some more information about view impacts, and we'll share that with the commission next week, but there is more detailed information. If that's not enough for you to prepare in the next week with the materials that we've handed to you tonight.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we're adjourned.